I hugged my knees, and Beer hugged me as we sat in the corner of the living room. Across me, Jan sat, biting her nails with Mark next to her. A hand placed reassuringly on her leg. Claire, Benjamin, and Grace were whispering in the hallway, and I knew that they were talking about Andi. I didn't hear what they were saying, however. I was solely listening to the underbelly of the house, praying to God that Daniel was okay down there. Ethan and Frank stood by the kitchen door waiting with bated breath to thrust it open whenever the need be. Eventually, the conversation in the hallway fizzled out, and the entire mold-covered structure fell into pure silence. For our collective sanities, we constantly interacted with each other at every point of the day. No matter where you were in the house, you could always make out the ambience of someone talking from somewhere. The fact the place was this quiet during daytime was unsettling. My imagination wandered to what this house might have looked like before we arrived, just sitting still among the hills, sinisterly waiting for unfortunate souls to arrive in its vacant walls. I imagined that this is what it would have sounded like. Across from me, Jan suddenly perked up, as well as Mark. It didn't take me long to realize why. Footsteps beneath us, rapid and not sparring caution. Jan scurried on all fours into the hallway and peered down towards the kitchen. "Get ready!" she shouted in a whisper. Top, tink, plug. It was faint and far behind, but we knew the creature was fast. From one end of the building we heard footsteps pounding up the stairs towards the yellow room, and the other, the beast, burrowed through the labyrinth of the rooms below. We all stood up and rushed into the hallway, in time to hear the door of the kitchen swing open and see Daniel sprint into the room. Frank and Ethan slammed the door and dragged the pantry back into place as we all crowded around the panting man who had just returned. The thing downstairs had just reached the yellow room and began to scream and pound, but we didn't care. There were more important matters. "Daniel, are you okay? Did you find her? Why's she down there? What do you see?" The barrage of questions clearly overwhelmed Dan, and he raised his hand to silence everyone, while he caught his breath. We all waited with pounding hearts until he could speak. He kept his face to the floor the whole time, but when he finally looked up to see the gallery of nervous and scared faces, his expression faded to a solemn one. "Sorry, everyone. I went as far as I could, but there's a big long staircase going down. As soon as I stepped foot in there, I heard the thing below me and started running back." Daniel clenched his jaw and I could see his eyes watering. "I didn't. There was no signs of her. If that thing was down there, then I don't know if she..." He couldn't finish, but it didn't matter. If Andi went down there while the thing was in the same place, then in all likelihood she wouldn't come back. Tears began to fall, and gentle sobs emerged from everyone in the group. Not me, however. My brain was still in denial. "Okay. That's okay," I said softly, taking a deep breath. "We can wait until it settles down and then try again tomorrow. I'll go this time." Dan gave me a sympathetic look. "Joe, I'm okay. I'm okay now. I'll be okay. Joe, I know you're upset. I'm not. I mean, I am. But I'm okay. I can go down and... Joe, please. I can do this, just let me. Joe, Daniel said more sternly this time, placing his hand on my shoulders. I looked into his eyes to see that they were full of pain and tears. I surveyed the room to find the same from everyone else. Sorry, kid. But... she's gone. At that point, I felt something in me break. It was almost physical. The same pain of brokenness I had felt so many years ago in that dark autumn night in Arkansas. She was gone. Andi was gone, and it was my fault. I collapsed into the same grief that the rest of the house was feeling, and then I felt nothing at all. We all sat up when we heard the sharp groan of pipes from outside. Dan withdrew from his knees and tilted his head to listen. Do you think it's stopping? Bear asked after a moment. The question was poorly timed. At once we heard the water outside begin to pick up, going from suburban rain to tropical storm. The room pounded with the onslaught of the water, and Bear, Ethan and I all stood preparing for what might come next. I crossed down the hallway into the office and looked out the window. Of course, I thought. Never a break. The water was coming down like a shower over every inch of open sky. Anxiety nestled into my gut as I watched it further fill the flood below. If we didn't move fast, we would drown before those things outside could get us. The only problem now that we had the keys was getting back to the door. All roads had become a sea of nightmare jellyfish, and with the rain now coming down as hard as it was, I was just in time to see the tops of the fences getting consumed. We really didn't have a whole lot of options. On my way back to the bathroom, I looked down into the entryway. I jumped at the sight. Shoot. What? Did someone leave the door open? No, Ethan told me. I was the last one in and I shut it. Bear hopped up and peered down to see the same thing I did. The first floor was half flooded, and even worse, 3 fetuses drifted just below the steps. How did they get in? Bear cried. Daniel shook his head. My wife, he muttered. I looked at him. What? My wife let them in. What do you mean? Daniel looked vacantly at the floor. Never mind. Bear gave a concerned glance, and I stepped into the bathroom and knelt in front of him. Daniel, I thought for a second before speaking again. I needed to find the right words. I have no idea how it must feel going through what you did. I wish I could tell you the exact thing you needed to hear right now, but I don't know what that is. I don't think there is anything. But one thing I do know is how it feels to lose somebody you love, especially when it's your fault. What happened to Andi wasn't your fault, kid. She's not who I'm talking about, I replied. At that, he looked up. I'm so unbelievably sorry about your daughter, Daniel. I know that it feels like you can't go on and that you failed, but you've never failed us, and we really need you right now. I stuck my hand out to him. Please. He eyed my open palm for a moment, then looked back at me. Slowly he lifted his hand from the cold, wet floor and placed it in mine. I smiled and held him up. Daniel crossed the staircase and looked over the edge. Damn, he grumbled before turning and pacing the hallway. What do we do? Bear asked. I'm working on it, he spoke. He looked up and ran his hands through his hair as he paced. Suddenly something caught his eye. An attic hatch. That's it. What? We aren't going to be able to swim back to the door, especially with those things chasing us. We're going to have to sail. Well, then I hope you have a boat up there, Ethan quipped. Air mattresses. Air mattresses? Yeah, blow-up beds. My wife had them for whenever her family came to stay and there wasn't enough mattresses. We can inflate those and paddle them back over there. Do you need electricity to blow them up? You do, but I think I have an outlet up there. The street lights outside are still on, so I think the power will still be running. Bear sighed and looked around. Well, it's the best plan we have so far, and I don't think we have time to think about anything else. She glanced over her shoulder to see the water steadily rising up the steps. Daniel nodded and bent over, scooping up the keys he had thrown. He jammed them into his pocket, then reached behind a stand in the hallway and grabbed a hook to pull the attic down. The ladder collapsed down the hallway as dust came puffing out of the entrance. One by one we climbed up while the drowned souls wailed from below, slowly ascending their way towards us. The attic was dark, with only 3 windows letting in what meager light from outside made it through the rain. I pulled out the flashlight and clicked it on when Daniel pulled on a cord, lighting a single bulb in the middle of the room. I'll look for the mattresses. In the meantime, you 3 look for anything that we can use as oars. We don't want to be paddling with our limbs in that water. Got it. Sure thing. Okay. We all set to work in separate areas of the attic, digging through boxes and looking for anything we could. Dan pulled out the 2 air mattresses and began to unpack them, ensuring there weren't any holes or signs that it might not make the journey. I found an old plastic rake for oars, and Ethan found a dusty broom. A roll of duct tape had been sitting on top of one of the boxes, so we began taping the bristles and claws to both, making sure that they had enough surface area to paddle through the wake. Outside, the water was rising incredibly fast. I looked down through the attic entrance and saw that it had reached the 2nd story and was already a foot away from the ground. Below me, the things that called the water home turned their curled bodies to look at me. Their black eyes leaked a dark substance into the water. I pulled away and continued searching. Bear found an old tennis racket for a paddle, and she passed it to Ethan to duct tape. 3 out of 4. Daniel gave us all a heads up and opened the window, throwing one of the mattresses outside before plugging it into an extension cord and inflating it on the roof. Beyond the neighborhood had become an ocean, with only the houses that had 2 stories standing tall above the storm. I looked off to the direction that the exit was in and hoped that we would find it in all of the chaos. Just as Dan got the 2nd mattress outside and began to inflate it, Ethan withdrew a shovel tucked far in the corner of the room. Hey, why don't we duct tape this one? He joked. Nobody was in the mood. Our 2nd vessel finished with a few feet of water to spare. The fetuses were now close below us. We could hear the choirs of their muffled screams. We all moved to the window where the mattresses rested outside, and I noticed that Daniel looked especially distraught. "Don't worry," I told him. "This will all be over soon." He smiled with no confidence behind his eyes, but nodded anyway. "All right," he stuttered. "Here goes nothing." He pulled a pair of hedge clippers he had found and snipped both cords of the mattresses so they wouldn't be tailing us. Then slowly pushed one of them off onto the water below. It fell gracefully on top of two of the drowned, but they resurfaced to the side after a moment. We all watched and waited to see if they would be able to drag the thing under, but after a minute of it still being afloat, we breathed a collective sigh of relief. "Yeah, you and Ethan take one. Joel and I will take the other, okay?" The two nodded and then climbed out of the window, oars in hand, taking caution not to slip off the shingles in the onslaught of the downpour. Daniel and I followed suit and gingerly climbed onto a mattress that had already been set in the water. Part of a fleshy mass drifted through the murk no more than a foot away in any direction. "Are you kids ready?" Daniel called over the storm. "Not really," Ethan yelled. "But when have we ever been?" Daniel nodded. "Keep your paddles away from the tentacles. If they get dragged in, you'll have to use your hands, and I don't think I need to explain why that's a bad thing." Behind us we could hear water blurbing into the attic. The whole house would be submerged in a few minutes. It was time to move. Together at once we all pushed off the roof of the house and into the storm. We sat on our knees as we gently weaved our makeshift instruments through the water. My heart pounded every time it entered the pool for fear that at any moment the oar would be yanked into the murky abyss. Below the water we could see the orange glow from the streetlights that had somehow still been going and continued glowing brightly. Dozens of blobs were below too, swimming along with our rafts as we went. We followed the path that the lights presented, while I held the flashlight in my mouth, keeping a beam out in front of us, in case any rooftops still posed a threat. The things in the water were fast, but luckily our paddling was faster, and eventually we no longer had to worry about our tools getting dragged under by anything. After we got ahead of everything, we beelined it, didn't stop, rowing straight down the road towards the catwalk. Soon the wall came into view through the rain, and with it a pipe that had been directly above the door. We stopped paddling and pulled the oars onto the raft. Dan looked over to Bear and Ethan. "All right, no time to waste," he said in a shockingly optimistic tone. "I'll see you kids on the other side, all right?" They nodded and slowly crawled to the edge. I went to do the same, but Dan suddenly grabbed my arm. I turned back. "What's the matter?" Dan smiled. "Here." He slapped a rude awakening into my hand, the car keys. I suddenly remembered something I had forgotten amidst the chaos. This was Daniel's room. He wasn't planning on leaving. "I love you kids. You and everyone up there. Get them home, okay?" Before I could say anything, Daniel stood and launched himself into the water. Seeing him do so, Ben and Ethan did the same.
"Dan!"
I yelled before diving in after. The water was dark, and only the beam from my light guided us. I wanted to get Daniel out safely, but I also had to get Ben and Ethan there. I shone the light on the door and saw that all three of them were heading towards it. As we descended, I could feel the pressure mounting in my ears and pushing against my chest. The icy water chilled me to the bone, and my heart pounded. Not only from activity, but from fear. I couldn't let Daniel stay here. I had to get him out. We reached the door and Ethan and Bear hooked their legs to the catwalk. I passed the light to Ethan and he held it while I slipped the key into the hole. Please, I pleaded. Please work. Shk. The muffled sound of the mechanism turning echoed out from the door. I instantly pulled the handle. It turned, but no matter how hard I yanked, it wasn't moving. The water weighed too much against it. I braced my feet on the wall and tried again. No use. Come on, I screamed internally. Open up, god damn it! Ethan saw my struggle and placed a hand on it as well. Then Bear, together, we all tugged at once. That's when I felt it. A slight shift. I swung my legs over to the side of the rail and pulled with all of my might. A small suction filled the area. Then it got more intense and more until... whoosh. I pulled the door towards me and watched as water began rushing out like a geisha. Ethan tried to hold on to the rail, but the force was too strong. His hands slipped and he was dragged out into whatever fate lay beyond. Next was Bear. She still clutched the side of the door, but with how she was trying to hold on, if she didn't stop, she was going to cause it to pull shut again. Still holding the handle and the rail with my legs, I reached out and pried her fingers loose. I knew she was only holding on to make sure we were safe. We were going to be okay. I looked to Daniel last, who was still clinging to the rail. At this point, I could feel my lungs begin to burn, and I knew that time was running out. I nodded to the opening, but he shook his head. I stared at him for a moment, and that's when he realized that I wasn't going to go until he did. At that, he let go and let the current take him. Thud. The suction suddenly stopped. I peered around the door to see something strange. A thin sheet of glass was blocking the door. I let go of the handle and reached out to touch it. It was cold and slick. Not glass. Ice. Daniel looked at me and then shook his head with an expression of grief. This was it. This was the barrier. He'd been right. It wasn't going to let him leave. I wasn't going to take that for an answer, however. I bit hard against the sheet, trying to break it. Doing so only took more oxygen that I was already running low on. But I didn't care. I wasn't letting it in like this. On the other side, I could see a staircase that led down and continued to bang and pound. I saw Bear and Ethan running back up. The current must have sucked them down quite a bit. When they took in the scene, they rushed up to the ice and joined me in my goal, calling out for Dan and me in the process. They had no idea that I wasn't the one who was trapped. Just then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to see Daniel looking at me. He pointed towards the road where the street lights still burned their soft orange embers. In the glow, a mass group of the drowned were approaching. We were out of time. Daniel gave my shoulder a squeeze, then kicked off the wall towards them. I audibly screamed out through the water, releasing a burst of bubbles into the abyss. I reached out and grabbed Daniel's leg, but he quickly set to trying to shake me loose. Warm tears mixed into the cold water around me as I clung tightly to what I had. The man just looked back with pleading. He looked back with a pleading look. A pleading look I had seen before. I knew what he was saying. I sat by myself in the hallway, staring at the kitchen door. It was dark out, and I could hear the bodies dancing around outside, but I didn't care. I didn't want to go back to the bed that I would sleep alone in. Daniel peeked his head out of the room and saw me. Without a word, he came over and slouched next to me. "How are you doing?" I didn't respond. I just shook my head. He dropped his gaze to the floor. "I'm really sorry, Joel. I really am." I stayed quiet. Not because I was upset or didn't want to talk. I just didn't know what to say. Everything felt pointless now that she was gone. "Do you want me to sit here with you?" I shook my head again. "It's all right. You should go to bed, Dan." I could tell he wanted to say something more, but he chose not to. Instead, he said, "I won't make you come to bed if you promise me you won't run out that door after her tonight." A grieving smile came across my lips. I wanted to. I really did. But everyone was already hurting just as much as I was. Andi was our family after all. I wasn't going to go anywhere and hurt anyone else. However, the fact Daniel knew I wanted to was endearing. "Don't worry. I won't." "Good." He nodded. He then pursed his lips for a moment before pulling something out of his pocket. "Hey, this was under your pillow. I didn't mean to go through your stuff. We were just looking for anything that might help us find her." He pressed a small folded piece of paper into my hand, and I stared down at it for a few moments before looking back at him. Tears began to well in my eyes. I already knew what it was. Andi and I talked about doing it for Ethan and Bear when we were still planning to leave together. "Good night, Joel." "Good night, Dad," I told him with a smile. He stood and slowly crept back into the room, and I waited until the door was shut to carefully unfold the paper. Tears were falling before I had even read a single word. Her handwriting was enough. "Dear Joel," it read. "I'm so unbelievably sorry. I know how upset you're going to be at me, and you have every single right to be. If you're reading this, that means I've already gone, and I pray that you won't try to follow me. I was thinking an awful lot about what you said about losing each other, and about thinking it's your fault. And you were right, Joel. The more I thought about coming down here with you and losing you, the more I didn't want to go. But Joel, you know that I have to. You know that I can't stay here forever. As much as I love you, I want to be able to love you in a place that's normal. A place where we can be fully happy. And this place is not it. You kept me alive these past few years, so now I hope that you'll let me save you. I'm going to find an exit, Joel. And I promise that once I do, I will bring you all back. And we can get out of here together. We can be together, Joel. I knew that you wouldn't allow me to go alone if you had known. And that's why I had to sneak out. I wish I didn't have to do it this way, but I know you love me too much to let me go. It's the same reason that I know you'll blame yourself for this, but please, I'm begging you, do not, Joel. I love you so much. And I can't be another reason you beat yourself up. There are too many ghosts in your life that you think you've created, and you're never going to be better if you don't grow beyond them. Sometimes we lose people, or people have to go away, but that doesn't mean you have to let them haunt you. Feel that pain, hold the memories, and then let go, Joe. Otherwise, it'll tear you up from the inside. I love you so much, and I will be back before you know it. Andi. Daniel looked at me and I looked at him. I was suddenly aware of how tightly my fist was clenched around his leg, of how much my lungs burned, of how bad my eyes stung. His eyes pleaded with me, a pleading look I had seen before. I knew what he was saying because Andi had said the same thing to me many times before, and I had never listened. Let go. I slowly released my grip and felt Daniel's leg slip through my fingers. He looked at me for a second longer before he began swimming back away from me. Behind me I heard Ethan and Bear screaming after him, but it was no use. He had made up his mind. There was no other way. I felt a slight tug from back as a small hole formed in the ice. It got stronger and stronger the further Daniel swam away from me. The infants moved closer, but he didn't panic. Instead, he just stopped swimming and stretched his arms out, letting them take him. The last thing I saw before the ice broke and the water swept Bear, Ethan and I further down into the house was Daniel looking back at me, eyes closed and accepting. Kia ora te whānau. Hello, my family. Hello, my fellow book readers. I guess I'm the one doing the book reading, isn't it? Anyway, doesn't matter. I hope you enjoyed tonight's reading. This one hits pretty hard, actually, when you think about it. Daniel's been with us since the beginning, so seeing him kind of fade off into the abyss is in... how do I explain it? It's a double-edged sword, really. The fact that he's let it go and he's accepting that this is his fate, versus the fact that we know we're probably never going to see him again. It's definitely a heart-jerker. What am I talking about? Tear-jerker. There we go. I got there. Alright, well, I've jargoned myself into a hole. I hope you enjoyed tonight, and those who have managed to get through my ramblings of just before, I appreciate you. It's good to see that I have at least one person who tries to follow along with me when I put my heart into these things, including the aftermath. Aftermath, not aftermath. I don't know, I give up. Anyway, look, wherever you are, have an amazing night or day, okay? Look after yourself, be safe, and as always, I'm Grimm. And I'm, well, signing off.